每天练习英语听、说、练，与我们一起提升你的语言技能。完成后，在我们的应用程式里多加练习。免费，连结在下方。开始练习吧。
Mia likes biology class. Mia likes biology class.
Mia 喜欢生物课。
Mia likes biology class. Mia likes biology class. Alex studies cells today. Alex studies cells today.
Alex 今天学习细胞。
Alex studies cells today. Alex studies cells today. Noah talks about living things. Noah talks about living things.
Noah 谈论生物。
Noah talks about living things. Noah talks about living things. Zoe reads a chapter on DNA. Zoe reads a chapter on DNA.
Zoe 阅读一章关于 DNA 的内容。
Zoe reads a chapter on DNA. Zoe reads a chapter on DNA. Liam uses a microscope in lab. Liam uses a microscope in lab.
Liam 在实验室使用显微镜。
Liam uses a microscope in lab. Liam uses a microscope in lab. Ava draws a plant cell for homework. Ava draws a plant cell for homework.
Ava 为作业画一个植物细胞。
Ava draws a plant cell for homework. Ava draws a plant cell for homework. Ethan asks about the nucleus. Ethan asks about the nucleus.
Ethan 询问关于细胞核的问题。
Ethan asks about the nucleus. Ethan asks about the nucleus. Lily points to the cell membrane. Lily points to the cell membrane.
Lily 指住细胞膜。
Lily points to the cell membrane. Lily points to the cell membrane. Caleb says mitochondria make energy. Caleb says mitochondria make energy.
Caleb 说粒线体产生能量。
Caleb says mitochondria make energy. Caleb says mitochondria make energy. Nora learns about ribosomes. Nora learns about ribosomes.
Nora 学到关于核糖体。
Nora learns about ribosomes. Nora learns about ribosomes. Diego looks at onion cells on a slide. Diego looks at onion cells on a slide.
Diego 在玻片上观察洋葱细胞。
Diego looks at onion cells on a slide. Diego looks at onion cells on a slide. Priya explains what a tissue is. Priya explains what a tissue is.
Priya 解释什么是组织。
Priya explains what a tissue is. Priya explains what a tissue is. Omar names the organs in the body. Omar names the organs in the body.
Omar 说出身体的器官名称。
Omar names the organs in the body. Omar names the organs in the body. Hannah labels the parts of a flower. Hannah labels the parts of a flower.
Hannah 标示花的各部位。
Hannah labels the parts of a flower. Hannah labels the parts of a flower. Felix compares plant and animal cells. Felix compares plant and animal cells.
Felix 比较植物细胞与动物细胞。
Felix compares plant and animal cells. Felix compares plant and animal cells. Sophia watches a video on photosynthesis. Sophia watches a video on photosynthesis.
Sophia 观看一部关于光合作用的影片。
Sophia watches a video on photosynthesis. Sophia watches a video on photosynthesis. Marco writes a note about chloroplasts. Marco writes a note about chloroplasts.
Marco 写下关于叶绿体的笔记。
Marco writes a note about chloroplasts. Marco writes a note about chloroplasts. Aisha says plants need sunlight. Aisha says plants need sunlight.
Aisha 说植物需要阳光。
Aisha says plants need sunlight. Aisha says plants need sunlight. Ben talks about water and carbon dioxide. Ben talks about water and carbon dioxide.
Ben 谈到水和二氧化碳。
Ben talks about water and carbon dioxide. Ben talks about water and carbon dioxide. Ruby says photosynthesis makes oxygen. Ruby says photosynthesis makes oxygen.
Ruby 说光合作用会产生氧气。
Ruby says photosynthesis makes oxygen. Ruby says photosynthesis makes oxygen. Ivan reviews cell respiration. Ivan reviews cell respiration.
Ivan 复习细胞呼吸。
Ivan reviews cell respiration. Ivan reviews cell respiration. May circles the word chromosome. May circles the word chromosome.
May 在染色体这个词上画圈。
May circles the word chromosome. May circles the word chromosome. Luca asks how genes work. Luca asks how genes work.
Luca 询问基因如何运作。
Luca asks how genes work. Luca asks how genes work. Zara spells the word heredity. Zara spells the word heredity.
Zara 拼出遗传这个词。
Zara spells the word heredity. Zara spells the word heredity. Nina says traits come from parents. Nina says traits come from parents.
Nina 说性状来自父母。
Nina says traits come from parents. Nina says traits come from parents. Leo gives an example of a gene. Leo gives an example of a gene.
Leo 举出一个基因的例子。
Leo gives an example of a gene. Leo gives an example of a gene. Maya mentions dominant and recessive. Maya mentions dominant and recessive.
Maya 提到显性与隐性。
Maya mentions dominant and recessive. Maya mentions dominant and recessive. Sam wonders what a mutation is. Sam wonders what a mutation is.
Sam 想知道什么是突变。
Sam wonders what a mutation is. Sam wonders what a mutation is. Tarek reads about evolution. Tarek reads about evolution.
Tarek 阅读关于演化的内容。
Tarek reads about evolution. Tarek reads about evolution. Juno says species change over time. Juno says species change over time.
Juno 说物种会随时间改变。
Juno says species change over time. Juno says species change over time. Kai brings up natural selection. Kai brings up natural selection.
Kai 提到自然选择。
Kai brings up natural selection. Kai brings up natural selection. Rena talks about adaptation. Rena talks about adaptation.
Rena 谈论适应。
Rena talks about adaptation. Rena talks about adaptation. Yasmin describes a fossil. Yasmin describes a fossil.
Yasmin 描述化石。
Yasmin describes a fossil. Yasmin describes a fossil. Hugo asks why some animals go extinct. Hugo asks why some animals go extinct.
Hugo 问为什么有些动物会灭绝。
Hugo asks why some animals go extinct. Hugo asks why some animals go extinct. Clara draws a simple food chain. Clara draws a simple food chain.
Clara 画出一个简单的食物链。
Clara draws a simple food chain. Clara draws a simple food chain. Arya shows predator and prey. Arya shows predator and prey.
Arya 展示捕食者与猎物。
Arya shows predator and prey. Arya shows predator and prey. Jonas names producers and consumers. Jonas names producers and consumers.
Jonas 说出生产者和消费者。
Jonas names producers and consumers. Jonas names producers and consumers. Mira adds decomposers to the chart. Mira adds decomposers to the chart.
Mira 在图表中加入分解者。
Mira adds decomposers to the chart. Mira adds decomposers to the chart. Pablo explains an ecosystem. Pablo explains an ecosystem.
Pablo 解释生态系。
Pablo explains an ecosystem. Pablo explains an ecosystem. Suki defines a habitat. Suki defines a habitat.
Suki 定义栖地。
Suki defines a habitat. Suki defines a habitat. Ravi lists parts of the environment. Ravi lists parts of the environment.
Ravi 列出环境的各部分。
Ravi lists parts of the environment. Ravi lists parts of the environment. Elena talks about biodiversity. Elena talks about biodiversity.
Elena 谈论生物多样性。
Elena talks about biodiversity. Elena talks about biodiversity. Theo shares a fact about conservation. Theo shares a fact about conservation.
Theo 分享一个关于保育的事实。
Theo shares a fact about conservation. Theo shares a fact about conservation. Quinn asks how to protect species. Quinn asks how to protect species.
Quinn 询问如何保护物种。
Quinn asks how to protect species. Quinn asks how to protect species. Ivy gives an example of a mammal. Ivy gives an example of a mammal.
Ivy 举出一个哺乳动物的例子。
Ivy gives an example of a mammal. Ivy gives an example of a mammal. Max says birds have feathers. Max says birds have feathers.
Max 说鸟类有羽毛。
Max says birds have feathers. Max says birds have feathers. Tara notes that reptiles have scales. Tara notes that reptiles have scales.
Tara 指出爬行动物有鳞片。
Tara notes that reptiles have scales. Tara notes that reptiles have scales. Owen says amphibians live on land and water. Owen says amphibians live on land and water.
Owen 说两栖类生活在陆地和水中。
Owen says amphibians live on land and water. Owen says amphibians live on land and water. Kira talks about fish and gills. Kira talks about fish and gills.
Kira 谈论鱼与鳃。
Kira talks about fish and gills. Kira talks about fish and gills. Dylan describes an insect. Dylan describes an insect.
Dylan 描述一种昆虫。
Dylan describes an insect. Dylan describes an insect. Isla says a spider is an arachnid. Isla says a spider is an arachnid.
Isla 说蜘蛛是蛛形纲动物。
Isla says a spider is an arachnid. Isla says a spider is an arachnid. Mateo points to the backbone in a model. Mateo points to the backbone in a model.
Mateo 指住模型上的脊椎。
Mateo points to the backbone in a model. Mateo points to the backbone in a model. Jada says humans are vertebrates. Jada says humans are vertebrates.
Jada 说人类是脊椎动物。
Jada says humans are vertebrates. Jada says humans are vertebrates. Amir names some invertebrates. Amir names some invertebrates.
Amir 说出一些无脊椎动物。
Amir names some invertebrates. Amir names some invertebrates. Nico asks about fungi. Nico asks about fungi.
Nico 询问关于真菌的问题。
Nico asks about fungi. Nico asks about fungi. Lila talks about yeast and mold. Lila talks about yeast and mold.
Lila 谈论酵母与霉菌。
Lila talks about yeast and mold. Lila talks about yeast and mold. Gino mentions bacteria. Gino mentions bacteria.
Gino 提到细菌。
Gino mentions bacteria. Gino mentions bacteria. Sana asks what a virus is. Sana asks what a virus is.
Sana 问什么是病毒。
Sana asks what a virus is. Sana asks what a virus is. Yuri reads about the immune system. Yuri reads about the immune system.
Yuri 阅读关于免疫系统的内容。
Yuri reads about the immune system. Yuri reads about the immune system. Kira says white blood cells fight germs. Kira says white blood cells fight germs.
Kira 说白血球会对抗病菌。
Kira says white blood cells fight germs. Kira says white blood cells fight germs. Bruno names the parts of blood. Bruno names the parts of blood.
Bruno 说出血液的各部分。
Bruno names the parts of blood. Bruno names the parts of blood. Esme says the heart pumps blood. Esme says the heart pumps blood.
Esme 说心脏会把血液泵出。
Esme says the heart pumps blood. Esme says the heart pumps blood. Raoul points to the lungs. Raoul points to the lungs.
Raoul 指住肺。
Raoul points to the lungs. Raoul points to the lungs. Keiko explains how we breathe. Keiko explains how we breathe.
Keiko 解释我们如何呼吸。
Keiko explains how we breathe. Keiko explains how we breathe. Tarek says oxygen enters the blood. Tarek says oxygen enters the blood.
Tarek 说氧气会进入血液。
Tarek says oxygen enters the blood. Tarek says oxygen enters the blood. Ines talks about carbon dioxide. Ines talks about carbon dioxide.
Ines 谈论二氧化碳。
Ines talks about carbon dioxide. Ines talks about carbon dioxide. Zane describes the brain and nerves. Zane describes the brain and nerves.
Zane 描述大脑与神经。
Zane describes the brain and nerves. Zane describes the brain and nerves. Alba mentions the spinal cord. Alba mentions the spinal cord.
Alba 提到脊髓。
Alba mentions the spinal cord. Alba mentions the spinal cord. Nia says the stomach helps digest food. Nia says the stomach helps digest food.
尼尔说胃有助于消化食物。
Nia says the stomach helps digest food. Nia says the stomach helps digest food. Greta names the small intestine. Greta names the small intestine.
Greta 指出小肠。
Greta names the small intestine. Greta names the small intestine. Hal points to the large intestine. Hal points to the large intestine.
Hal 指住大肠。
Hal points to the large intestine. Hal points to the large intestine. Uma talks about nutrients and energy. Uma talks about nutrients and energy.
Uma 谈论养分与能量。
Uma talks about nutrients and energy. Uma talks about nutrients and energy. Cedric says bones support the body. Cedric says bones support the body.
Cedric 说骨头支撑身体。
Cedric says bones support the body. Cedric says bones support the body. Leora adds that muscles move bones. Leora adds that muscles move bones.
Leora 补充说肌肉会带动骨头运动。
Leora adds that muscles move bones. Leora adds that muscles move bones. Basil mentions joints and tendons. Basil mentions joints and tendons.
Basil 提到关节与肌腱。
Basil mentions joints and tendons. Basil mentions joints and tendons. Petra says skin protects the body. Petra says skin protects the body.
Petra 说皮肤保护身体。
Petra says skin protects the body. Petra says skin protects the body. Soren talks about the senses. Soren talks about the senses.
Soren 谈论感官。
Soren talks about the senses. Soren talks about the senses. Kendra names sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Kendra names sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell.
Kendra 说出视觉、听觉、味觉、触觉与嗅觉。
Kendra names sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Kendra names sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Milo describes hormones in the body. Milo describes hormones in the body.
Milo 描述体内的荷尔蒙。
Milo describes hormones in the body. Milo describes hormones in the body. Dana mentions the endocrine system. Dana mentions the endocrine system.
Dana 提到内分泌系统。
Dana mentions the endocrine system. Dana mentions the endocrine system. Farah says cells divide to grow. Farah says cells divide to grow.
Farah 说细胞为了生长会分裂。
Farah says cells divide to grow. Farah says cells divide to grow. Jules asks what mitosis is. Jules asks what mitosis is.
Jules 问什么是有丝分裂。
Jules asks what mitosis is. Jules asks what mitosis is. Otto reads about meiosis in class. Otto reads about meiosis in class.
Otto 在课堂上阅读关于减数分裂的内容。
Otto reads about meiosis in class. Otto reads about meiosis in class. Raffi compares sperm and egg cells. Raffi compares sperm and egg cells.
Raffi 比较精子与卵细胞。
Raffi compares sperm and egg cells. Raffi compares sperm and egg cells. Lena says fertilization starts a new life. Lena says fertilization starts a new life.
Lena 说受精开启新的生命。
Lena says fertilization starts a new life. Lena says fertilization starts a new life. Enzo talks about embryos. Enzo talks about embryos.
Enzo 谈论胚胎。
Enzo talks about embryos. Enzo talks about embryos. B mentions development before birth. B mentions development before birth.
B 提到出生前的发育。
B mentions development before birth. B mentions development before birth. Kareem explains inherited disorders. Kareem explains inherited disorders.
Kareem 解释遗传疾病。
Kareem explains inherited disorders. Kareem explains inherited disorders. Reina asks about blood types. Reina asks about blood types.
Reina 询问关于血型的问题。
Reina asks about blood types. Reina asks about blood types. Saul reads the genetic code chart. Saul reads the genetic code chart.
Saul 阅读遗传密码表。
Saul reads the genetic code chart. Saul reads the genetic code chart. Tia says DNA is a molecule. Tia says DNA is a molecule.
Tia 说 DNA 是一种分子。
Tia says DNA is a molecule. Tia says DNA is a molecule. Vila points to a double helix picture. Vila points to a double helix picture.
Vila 指出一张双螺旋的图片。
Vila points to a double helix picture. Vila points to a double helix picture.
感谢观看，订阅我们的频道并开启通知，及时获取新视频，持续你的英语学习之旅。